S's Studio. Can I just grab a link to this thing or something? There we go. Okay, I think we are all good to go. Everything's good. So, with that being said, I think we can get started. All right, it is Friday, December 12th. This is BitDevs Radio Hour number 5. I'm Stephen DeLorme.
And I'm Josh Doman.
Josh is here filling in for Alex, who is off doing cool Bitcoin conference stuff. So thanks for joining, Josh. How are you doing today?
I'm good. Thanks for having me.
So Josh has helped out with Socratic seminars and other content at our local BitDevs meetup here. So he seemed like a great person to bring on to chat about the latest in Bitcoin and other technical developments.
Always a lot of stuff happening.
Yeah. So things will be a little different. We'll see how the podcast goes for the rest of the year. We just had our holiday party for the Atlanta Bitcoin community on Wednesday evening. That was a blast. A lot of people doing karaoke, holiday bake-off. That was all fun. So not doing any more Bitcoin meetups for the rest of the year, but I'll try and keep the stream running, but we'll pick things back up in January with some fresh Bitcoin meetups for everybody. So what you been up to lately?
Well, I guess last month I got to go to North Carolina to the Star Bitcoin Plus Plus local event.
Nice. And this was the first local Bitcoin Plus Plus edition, I think, right?
That's right.
How was it?
It was great. It was a great turnout. A lot of local builders, a whole range of different types of projects people presented, mining, some consensus related stuff related to covenants. I got to present my project, Confidential Script, which we can talk about. But overall, I thought it was a great conference, and they did a great job.
Awesome. I know Bitcoin Plus Plus tends to have a focus for most of the events. Did this one have any particular focus?
No, as a local conference, it was primarily geared around what people were building. But it turned out to kind of have two focuses. One was related to mining, mining hardware, mining pools, etc. And then one was related to covenants. So that was kind of how it turned out. But that was not the ostensible purpose of the conference.
Yeah, that's the just the interests of the local community and the kinds of stuff people are working on up there.
Correct.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. So what was your favorite talk there?
Oh, there was a great talk about what's the project called? It's the UTXO price
Oh yeah.
index.
UTX Oracle, I think.
UTX Oracle. That's right. Let's see if I can find it. UTX Oracle. The creator, I forgot his name, basically went very in depth in how he built UTX Oracle, essentially using heuristics and probabilistic interpretations of Bitcoin data. I think primarily looking at things like what is the median transaction size and assuming that's $100. I think it's a little more complicated than that, but then using that to then get an estimate of what the Bitcoin price is over time purely using UTXO data.
Yeah.
And it was a great talk. People really enjoyed it. It was really interesting. And it'll be fun to see how the project evolves.
Yeah, I've seen him speak at conferences before. It is a really fascinating project. For anyone who's only listening to this, we have a image pulled up on screen that shows this kind of heat map that's comparing like different like Satoshi values of particular UTXOs versus like estimated dollar amounts, I think is what it's saying. And so you're looking in these kind of heat graphs for these areas where there's these like warm areas where there's these very clear correlations of a lot in this particular amount. And I guess my understanding of it was that you can assume that, okay, if people are transacting in things like even amounts like $10, $100, $1,000, $50 maybe, if you have these even amounts of money that people are using, then you will see that represented by specific amounts appearing in the UTXO set.
Correct. And I think part of the intuition is that a lot of these UTXOs are being created from exchanges, people withdrawing, and people tend to withdraw in whole dollar amounts. And so it's pretty cool. It seems to be fairly accurate, at least according to the current website. It's predicting a price of $90,000 per Bitcoin.
It's eerie how accurate it is.
Yeah. I haven't looked into too much, but he swears that he's not pulling in any actual price data, and that's actually what the Oracle is implying.
I mean, and I believe it. I am skeptical about the project personally for the long term. And I think I've expressed this to him at a conference. And so I think we were in agreement about this, but what could break this project long term is, I think if Bitcoin actually gets like mainstream wide adoption and hypothetically becomes a primary form of payment. Because if you think about like, you go out and like you buy a sandwich, and you know, in some areas of Atlanta the tax is going to be 6%, and other places it's going to be 7-8% sales tax for the same $10 sandwich. And so when you have people transacting it all the time, you're going to have these like highly variable amounts. But then in our current day, you have these situations where it's like, well, somebody's running a conference and the conference tickets cost $200, and it's like flat even, and you have like over the course of 2 weeks, you just have people constantly buying tickets to that conference for this flat $200 amounts, and you then can like figure out, well, this is probably what $200 is represented in Bitcoin over the course of 2 weeks.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things he talked about was how inscriptions and the whole ordinal craze really screw up UTX Oracle for some time, at least until he figured out how to essentially remove all of those transactions from his equations. And the reason obviously being is that people were buying these inscriptions with Bitcoin in different denominations. I think that, to your point, in the long run, I wonder to what extent this project is dependent on exchanges being a thing. As long as people are buying Bitcoin in dollars on an exchange and then withdrawing Bitcoin from exchanges, and that being the predominant form of transaction activity.
Yeah.
I wonder what will happen when, if Bitcoin fully matures and people aren't doing that anymore. Instead, they're getting Bitcoin through their job, or
Yeah.
or through trading locally, et cetera.
Exactly. It'll be chaos after that. But I'm still a fan of the project. It's super fascinating. Just the fact that the data is kind of there on chain in your node. I'm a super big fan of all this like on chain data analysis stuff. So
Yeah, no, I agree.
everything going okay with your microphone
Yeah,
over
can
there?
we
I
make
see
sure
good.
it's working? Actually, press the button.
Can you show it to me?
Power it on.
Yeah, it should be good.
Okay.
Yeah, as long as you get that orange light on, you should be good.
All right, great.
Cool. Let me just double check. Think everything looks like it's going good on the stream. Looks like everything is being cast to Twitter and YouTube smoothly, so we'll proceed. Maybe that was actually you mentioned inscriptions, and that might have been a good segue. So, but I want to hit on your talk a little bit first
yeah.
before we move on to something else.
Sure. So my talk actually just hit online yesterday or 2 days ago. So if you go to the Bitcoin Plus Plus Twitter page, you'll be able to watch my talk, the recorded talk. And at a very high level, what I presented was my project Confidential Script, which aims to make it possible to emulate Covenant opcodes today on mainnet through something called a trust execution environment, which is basically a super secure computer that can run in the cloud on AWS or on Google, et cetera. And the idea is to let people start experimenting and actually investing resources into things like Shield CSV or L2s or vaults, et cetera, that use these opcodes and help build a case for them versus just arguing about it on the internet. So I can talk about the project a little bit more detail, but that's what I presented.
Yeah, very cool. And for anybody who's kind of not familiar with what he's talking about, like arguing about shielded CSV or covenants or anything like that, it's like there are, for user experience, things that we might want to change at the Bitcoin protocol level. I say might want to because everyone has their own opinion about these things. And this, opinion building, this building rough consensus around protocol changes is very difficult. And it's sometimes a chicken and an egg problem. It's like, if Josh were to say, bring me a protocol upgrade, and I said, well, I have these concerns about it, and also who actually wants this? Does this thing actually have real users? It's like, well, it's very difficult to get real users if people have concerns about it, and we're still debating about it. So you do kind of get this chicken and egg problem where it's difficult to prove that people want something without merging it in first, but it's like you don't want to merge it in out of an abundance of caution because it's Bitcoin and it's this highly valuable asset.
May I add something?
Yeah, please.
Not only is it hard to prove people want it, it's hard to justify investing resources into building systems that depend upon it, right? If you are a big company or if you're a startup even, you are less likely to build a system that could be run immediately if it got adopted, if there's no way for you to be able to actually realize a return on your investment unless everyone else agrees to let it get into Bitcoin.
Yeah.
And so this governance problem, frankly, it's bigger than just covenants. It's fundamentally about how do we govern Bitcoin? How does Bitcoin adopt consensus changes moving forward? And what does that process look like? I want to emphasize that like this project is not revolutionary in any certain way. The idea of emulating proposals and TEs has been talked about for many, many years. What I'm trying to do is build something that's usable today that people can actually play around with. I have a Rust library that's independent of the TE that just allows you to convert script path spends, not to get too technical, but to be able to easily take any type of Bitcoin script evaluation software and be able to apply it to inside TE. And so my goal is for this to be a way to kind of diffuse some of the tension around these contentious debates. Because if people can start using these opcodes today through very secure enclave environments, it could take a little bit of the pressure off maybe core devs who have to currently put up with a lot of people fighting over trying to get things merged in. It makes it less risky for them to do so. And it can make it easier for people to justify investing into the kind of the system that people have been dreaming about. So,
Yeah, and that's a good point about investing, because I think it can be very challenging to make a startup around a protocol upgrade. And maybe some would argue we don't want that, but it's like if you want good software, you got to pay people to do it. And one kind of route is the like kind of traditional nonprofit funding open source devs route. Another route is like businesses actually get involved in open source and writing code that improves Bitcoin and its surrounding protocols. But it's a little challenging to do that if you're going to say make a startup around some kind of proposed protocol upgrade and kind of hitch your wagon to that and, hope it gets merged. Like it might work, it might not work, and
no one's gonna invest the resources in the first place because it wouldn't be logical.
yeah. Well, I've seen it happen before, but
Well, okay, fair enough.
yeah,
So
yeah. Well, awesome. Anything else you want to comment on about with a confidential script?
no, I was able to do a live demo in North Carolina.
Oh, yeah?
I have a working version, very, very alpha right now, though. I'm working on getting it to a point, though, where I can properly release it and people can start using
What
it.
did you launch in the TE in your live demo?
Oh, it was just a dummy script. It didn't do anything.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it was nothing fancy. But
Okay.
but it works with CTV and CAT and CSFS right now.
And is anybody building anything with it yet? Like, has somebody started implementing anything?
I would hope that they weren't implementing anything with it right
Sure.
now because it's not yet quite
Got it.
quite ready for that.
Okay,
At least
fair.
I would be comfortable.
Got it, yeah.
I want to make sure it's more polished.
This is alpha. Do not use unless for
Yes,
experimentation.
exactly.
Yeah. Got it. Cool. Yeah. Don't do this at home, kids.
Cool.
Well, that might be. I'm gonna zip back to where we were before to kind of do a fake segue here. So we were just talking about inscriptions a second ago and how that kind of messed with the UTX Oracle thing, and there's been a post. Well, there's been I guess you would call it a Bitcoin improvement proposal. There's been a piece of text that's been causing a little bit of drama and debate on Twitter lately, and you knew exactly which one I was talking about, so you just went ahead and opened it. For anyone who's just listening, we have a mailing list post here for the CAT BIP draft discussion. I'll go ahead and make a clarification. If you've been coming to Atlanta BitDevs meetups for a while, you've probably heard us throwing out the term CAT. Like I think Josh just mentioned the word CAT. Usually when we say that, we're talking about something different. We're usually talking about OpCat, which is a completely separate opcode and protocol change discussion. But there's this new BIP that is titled The CAT.
Do you know why it's called CAT?
I was a little unclear on that. I was hoping you would know.
I have no idea. I'm reading it now.
Oh, wait, you know what it is? It might be because some people...
Oh, cat and mouse.
I was about to say cat and mouse.
That's what they say right here.
Because some people say that fighting arbitrary data on Bitcoin is a cat and mouse game.
And that's what they're suggesting, that we be the cat.
We be the cat. I see.
I see. Interesting. Well, yeah, I don't know how much time we want to spend on this proposal.
I just want to. I mean, I think it's worth highlighting just at a high level for people, because when it's observing this. If you're not steeped in the technical discussion, it can be a little confusing what people are debating about. I mean, basically, this BIP draft here is proposing that we make what they call non-monetary UTXOs unspendable. So we'll break that down. Basically, what they mean is that on the Bitcoin ledger, we have these, units of Bitcoin, discrete units of Bitcoin. These are coins. You'll hear them called UTXO by the developers. Some people have tried to attach meta protocol data to these coins, inscriptions, stamps, things like that. The author of this BIP draft is proposing that if there is any like meta protocol arbitrary data associated with a coin, we treat it as non-monetary and we make it unspendable by consensus rules.
Interesting.
That's pretty dramatic, I think.
Yeah, it sounds like theft.
Yeah, it is confiscation of funds. That's for sure.
Could someone sue someone else over this?
That's a good question. If Bitcoin Core developers merged a pull request that made certain coins unspendable by their owners, would they get taken to court over it?
I mean, anyone can sue anyone. It's a matter of whether or not the court considers it a valid suit.
Yeah, exactly. But it seems that's one of those kind of legal, areas that I'm not sure about. But I can imagine that if I were in the shoes of a core developer, that I would be, frightened by that idea. I think also, my kind of just initial reaction to this was it kind of felt antithetical to the philosophy of Bitcoin. I mean, the whole reason many people got into this was for this idea of this censorship-resistant money, this money that people couldn't take from you, and it seems like, well, if we can just kind of decide, we're going to confiscate these funds, make them unspendable, that kind of goes against the ethos of Bitcoin to me.
On a technical level, what I find interesting about this proposal, just reading it now, is it proposes literally enshrining software outside of Bitcoin Core, like ORD, into Bitcoin Core, which is obviously written in a different language and is not architected for such a thing. And it's just an interesting concept of someone building some software and then that software then being enshrined into the protocol. When it wasn't intended to be. I mean...
Well, didn't we have a debate like this early in Bitcoin? Not a debate, but like, wasn't there an issue with a database upgrade, I think, in Bitcoin's early history where, because of the way this particular database handled stuff, it was effectively part of consensus.
No, you're absolutely right. It broke consensus because they updated the database and it accidentally broke something. And so, to your point, what happens if the database inside of ORD has an issue? Does that suddenly result in a fork of the network? I mean, this is never going to happen, but it's just it's kind of ludicrous to think about.
Yes, I don't think this proposal is going to gain traction, but I want to break it apart just because it got so much attention. I think it's important to really dig into why this is the case, and so. Because of that history where the database affected consensus, that was a very, very hard lesson learned. And as a result, the dev community, I think, is much more cautious about these things, about the idea of making external software packages dependent.
I'm actually incorrect. I'm reading it more closely now. In the actual proposal, node operators do not need to run ORD. Instead, they receive a blob with all of the UTXOs to be confiscated. And that set is derived using the ORD software.
Yes.
And so they don't actually have to run ORD in order to continue.
Well, the individual node operator doesn't need to run ORD, but somebody has to run ORD.
Somebody has to run it, yes, that's true.
And for anyone who's unfamiliar, ORD is the piece of software that it's used to create inscriptions, basically.
And runes, yeah.
Yeah, runes too. And so, I mean, this seems like an interesting problem because if I'm a node runner, I have to depend on when I'm downloading the blockchain, and I'm checking transactions if they're valid, I have to actually ask an ORD node in order to tell me if these transactions are valid or not. So in other words, we would be taking part of like consensus, checking if a transaction is good or not, and relying on a third-party piece of software. And it might not even be one that I'm running myself. It could just be from like somebody else's ORD that I'm pointing to. I mean, it seems risky. Like, what if, like, let's game out what could go wrong with that scenario. I mean, for one, if everybody's just trusting the same piece of, the same ORD server, that would be a centralization concern.
Yeah, what I'm not sure is if this is a one-time confiscation or a continuous confiscation. Is there a single blob that you just incorporate into core, or are you constantly doing this indefinitely? I'm not quite sure, to be honest with you. I mean, it'll make a difference, though. If you have to constantly then refer to the current version of ORD, then it'd be hard to make that determination. I don't know. I mean, I think that just like frankly, I don't necessarily know if the technical concerns are as relevant to just the legal and ethical and practical concerns. I mean, it's the concept of confiscating anybody's coins is just not going to happen, and it would be very damaging to Bitcoin, even if you thought it would be helpful in the short run. It would open the door up to future confiscations for other reasons. If you could be shown to be able to confiscate coins that are of a small denomination that belong to NFTs, what's to stop the government people coming to you and saying, hey, you cannot run Bitcoin core software unless you are also going to freeze these UTXOs from some bad guys we don't like. And that would fundamentally change the nature of Bitcoin in a way that I don't think anyone would like. So
I certainly don't think anybody who works on Bitcoin full time and has dedicated large parts of their career to working on it has an appetite for adding confiscatory measures into Bitcoin.
Correct. I mean, would also add, even the idea of dust itself is problematic, because what is dust today may not be dust tomorrow. If Bitcoin grows significantly, dust today might be worth something significant monetarily in 20, 30 years. Who are you to say that you can't spend it? Now, there's also a possibility of only freezing zero value outputs, which don't really exist today, but conceivably you could build a meta protocol that incorporates non-ephemeral zero value outputs. Maybe those are things that you'd be more comfortable with confiscating. But even that would open up a can of worms that I don't think people would want to deal with.
I think the last little bit worth mentioning on this one, if you scroll down, I think it was Greg Maxwell who posted.
Oh yeah, because the author cited Greg Maxwell in the original post.
Yes.
And then Greg Maxwell says that you understood my message that you've quoted, basically referring to the fact that back when he wrote that message in 2013, the average block was not full, and so it seemed pertinent to try to prevent people from abusing Bitcoin to store a bunch of data in those empty blocks. But that now that blocks are full and it's costly to do so, it's not so much of a problem.
And I think another thought that I thought he said that was interesting, and I'll go and say that this person who posted this is like a first-time poster, so whoever they are,
could be a troller.
It could be a troller. That's the thing. I mean, yeah.
You never know.
Could be somebody just trying to rile people up. But, like some of the stuff leading to some of the drama, I think this is an interesting thing Greg says. As an aside, since the idea fails so easily on basic principled grounds, it's a disrespectful waste of participants' time to advance a proposal at such length, technobabbly depth, which could have been floated with a single sentence. How would people feel about a proposal to discourage NFTs by identifying a snapshot of existing dust value NFT outputs and making them consensus invalid or similar? Much of the opposition to LLM use in the field of BIP discussion has been due to widespread misuse of LLMs to create thickets of dense language and obscure, non-starter, trivial, or ill-considered proposals, making them much more costly to deal with and discouraging serious and thoughtful review of all ongoing discussion. I think that's an important thing to dig into a little bit, because Alex and I were just talking about BIP3 and like the subject of like using LLMs to generate Bitcoin improvement proposals. And I think that this is really important. Bitcoin is open source, and anyone who wants to get involved with its development is free to do so. You just need to put in the time to learn about how it works. You need to put in the time to review other people's code, write some code, but it is an open process that anyone can participate in. But I think when people are interested in getting into Bitcoin development and looking at it from the outside, there's this kind of, mystique maybe about, people write these really, really long technical documents and they have an abstract at the beginning, and then, a bunch of long text with, code samples, and then a frequently asked questions at the end. That's what I need to do if I have an idea. And so, it's very, very easy to just be like, yeah, LLM, write me a BIP that, does this, that, and the other, and, create something that looks kind of like, hey, this is a technical document. Technical people will like this. This is what technical documents look like. And that's not really the case. It's not that, people who are developers are writing long documents just for the sake of making technical looking things. I mean, a lot of times, ideas within Bitcoin start as discussions, as Greg was saying, like a very simple idea. How do people feel about something like this? And you can carry across an idea very effectively with just like a 1 or 2 paragraph email and just get feedback on the idea. And then based on that feedback from the idea, you might learn something, and then you can choose whether to keep moving forward with it or not, and do that. I mean, I'll just bring this as an example. You've done that before, Josh. You've posted things to the mailing list, 1 or 2 paragraphs, gotten feedback, and then been like, oh yeah, never thought about that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it's the best way to iterate quickly.
Yeah.
There's no point in wasting all your time trying to make a perfect solution when you can gain information about whether people actually think it's a good idea with just a few sentences.
Yeah.
And I mean, I'll also say that, like, in terms of the AI slop, my opinion is it's pretty easy, pretty quick to determine whether or not it's worth your time. I don't really consider it that much of a problem. I know that some people think otherwise. It's obviously be a little bit annoying if you see this and you feel compelled to respond to it. But at the end of the day, it's just data. It's just ones and zeros on a page.
Sure.
No one's under any obligation to respond to anything anyone posts on the mailing list or anywhere else.
Yeah.
And a non-response can be just as indicative as a response itself.
Yeah.
And so, frankly, I wouldn't be surprised at all if this was somebody actually trolling who takes the opposite position, who thinks that the Knots folks are not of sound mind when it comes to Bitcoin protocol development in their and so I'm going to show that by creating the most rigorous but also ludicrous proposal possible, and create a fake name and blast it on the internet and start a big debate over it. So I think someone even suggested that Ryandel was behind it. I don't know if that's true. I saw someone say that on Twitter. So who knows what the truth is?
Yeah.
But I think that anybody would agree that confiscation is a non-starter of Bitcoin. I don't think we should spend any more time on this subject.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that sounds good to me. We can move on. And I thought it would be good to dig into that, but I think we've pretty much covered it as best as we can.
Okay. How are we doing on time?
Well, we probably got till about 4:15 or so.
So we can touch on quantum. We can touch on consensus cleanup, script restoration. What do we want to do?
Let's see. Why don't we talk about the quantum?
Okay, great.
You specifically mentioned that one to me.
Yeah, well, I know this is a subject a lot of people are interested in. There's been a lot of talk about quantum-related threats to Bitcoin for some time now. Most recently, I think Nick Carter had a couple pieces or a series of pieces which are still coming out on Twitter, where he's taking the position that quantum computing is a real threat to Bitcoin. It's much more imminent than people think, and we need to have a solution right now. And he's very concerned about it. There are a number of people in the Bitcoin space, developers, who are taking a very principled, technical, and academic approach to this problem. I don't think that anybody within like the Bitcoin development space, it takes the perspective that Bitcoin's going to get broken in a year or two. But a lot of people do think it's worth thinking about how we would solve this problem 5, 6, 7 years down the road, and what the proper best solution would look like. And so some work that happened in the spring that you may recall was the BIP 360 proposal, and where people are proposing a new type of taproot address that is quantum resistant.
Paid a quantum resistant script hash.
Yes, and also talking about different types of post-quantum signature proposals. And so this post on the mailing list by two folks from Blockstream was an analysis pretty in-depth about the post-quantum signature algorithms that may be available for Bitcoin in the future. Their focus is on hash-based schemes. So hash-based signature schemes are considered to be the most well understood and secure post-quantum schemes available today, because the assumptions are no different than the assumptions that underpin Bitcoin hashing for mining, etc. And so what these guys wrote about was Sphinx, which is the standard hash-based post-quantum signatures, and how they can maybe reduce the signature size from 8 kilobytes, which is enormous. 8 kilobytes is comparison to 64 bytes today for normal Bitcoin signatures. But how they can maybe reduce that signature size from 8 kilobytes to something closer to 3 or 4 kilobytes by tweaking some of the parameters from the existing usage.
Wait, what did you say the signature size was today?
64. So if you were to do a Schnorr signature,
Yeah.
your signature size is going to be 64 bytes.
64 bytes.
Yes.
That's pretty small.
Yes. And so with all these post-quantum signatures, they get a lot bigger.
Yeah.
But with Sphinx, for example, the standard signature size is 8,000 bytes.
That's
Or 8,000, 8 kilobytes. So we're talking about like 2 orders of magnitude bigger. And there's some concerns, obviously, about that in terms of like, hey, what does that mean for how many transactions we can do on the Bitcoin network? What the cost of those transactions? What does that mean for validation cost? Are these signatures, they might be 100 times bigger, but are they 100 times more expensive to validate? And what can we do in order to reduce the verification time, et cetera? And then there's some interesting other work that people are thinking about related to making signatures stateful. So one of the things they talk about in this paper, which generated a good amount of discussion on the mailing list, but then also in a delving post, they talk about stateful post-quantum signatures. So one of the ways that you can reduce the signature size from 4,000 or 8,000 bytes to something like 300 bytes is by making those signatures stateful. In contrast, Bitcoin signatures today are stateless. You don't need to know anything about the prior signatures that you've made in order to make a signature. Well, it turns out you can save a lot of space if you do know about the prior signatures that you made. And so what they propose in this delving post is the idea of essentially having 2 spending paths in the Bitcoin wallet. One for, let's say, your hardware device is going to remember all the signatures that you've made. And if you don't have to reset your hardware device, you're going to be able to make much cheaper signatures.
Yeah.
But then if you have to replace your hardware device, you'll need to use the backup path, which will be a little bit more expensive. But that could provide a middle ground where you're able to get the benefits of having state, where with still having the fallback of having a stateless option. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I'm looking at what you have on screen here. The delving post is 324 byte stateful post quantum signatures. So that's a huge That's like a huge
It's order of
re-
magnitude.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it makes it viable essentially.
Yeah. It's still more than the 64 byte one we have today, but it's way better than 8 kilobytes. And it's like, it's not every single day that you're replacing your hardware wallet or even replacing a hot wallet for that matter. So the idea of the statefulness makes sense. I mean, it seems like a plausible idea worth discussing.
Yeah. No. This seems to be very plausible. Obviously, there's also the possibility of having a completely different algorithm that's not hash based. There's some experimental work going on there that could result in very fancy math that's above my head, using isogenies and various things that I don't quite understand that could potentially get you to a similar size signature while also being stateless. But it might still be many, 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 many years before we are at a point where we feel comfortable enough with such a scheme. In the meantime, something like this is probably the most realistic and best option, because it could give you the best of both worlds of being able to make regular everyday usage plausible while still having the ability to recover your funds if you need it.
That sounds like an interesting kind of, I don't know, like almost emergency path solution. Like maybe it's the kind of thing that could be implemented quicker
Yes.
until like a more longer term solution is uncovered.
For sure. I'd also say there are some trade-offs. It sounds like with at least the current cryptography that we have, there are some features in Bitcoin that we would lose with post-quantum signatures. It sounds like we would lose the ability to do unhardened derivation, wallet derivation. So with your Bitcoin wallet today, you can just have your master XPub, and then you can derive all of your child keys from that master public key. My understanding...
And from their addresses.
My understanding is that we don't have a way of doing that right now with hash-based post-quantum cryptography. And so that would imply that you would need to essentially have pre-computed all the addresses that you're going to need beforehand. You won't be able to just say, hey, here's my public key, my master public key, and how many derive all my addresses. You won't be able to do that.
So it's like you would still be able to have something like an HD wallet where you have one private key that enables you to spend from, or like one like root that key that allows you to spend from all these different addresses, but you wouldn't be able to like dynamically generate those addresses over time. You'd need to pre-compute them.
That's what it sounds like, yes. You would be able to have one seed phrase for all of your addresses, but you would have to pre-compute all those addresses from the private key in your wallet at creation time. And so that may result in more address reuse by individuals because it's just too burdensome to do anything else, which is a potential downside.
Well, wait, I mean, it seems like a solvable problem. Couldn't we just like you initialize the wallet and then, you know, you generate 1,000 addresses and like store it? Like, let's say it's a hot wallet on a phone. You could just store it in the secure enclave or something like that on the phone and have it like retrievable when they open the app up.
You could. There's no problem with that, I suppose. I wonder what that would mean for things like Lightning, though, or what it would mean for. I mean, frankly, also like a lot of users are lazy and just want to go with something that's simple and easy to use. Would it be too burdensome to be maintaining? Like we're talking about my backup project, backing up your descriptor, which is only going to be a couple hundred bytes of data. Now you need to back up maybe half a megabyte of data or a megabyte of data, depending on how many addresses that you want. And then maybe as a wallet developer, you'll need to build in a flow in case the user runs out of addresses. What do you do with that? I could imagine developers might just find it easier just to have people reuse addresses, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Which would not... address reuse is problematic today for two reasons. One is it's bad for privacy, but second, it can also be bad for security. perhaps with a quantum address, the exposure of your public key wouldn't be so much of a big deal, but it would still be bad for privacy.
And I guess it would also be very problematic for the hardware wallet use case. Like if you are just, using a hardware wallet to sign all your transactions and stuff, the magic now is that using XPubs, we can derive the addresses without needing to, we can create receive addresses to get Bitcoin without needing to go fetch our hardware wallet from wherever it's safely stored.
Right. I mean, also practically, if your hardware wallet is the only one that's able to access your private key, and that means only your hardware wallet can derive your addresses,
Yeah.
then you would need to copy over all the addresses from your hardware wallet over. And there's like real reasons why we don't necessarily like Bluetooth connections between hardware devices and computers. You want separation, and so that's the reason why people like the idea of air-gapped wallets, where it's all QR code based, et cetera. Well, under that security regime, you wouldn't be able to easily transfer over thousands of addresses.
Yeah, like right now, the kind of security model of wallets is that, they're the hardware wallets at least are typically meant to only be able to send out things like signature data or things like that. Like it's like you can't just open some kind of like arbitrary connection to the wallet and send it any kind of arbitrary messages. It's supposed to, you send it some data, it gives you a signature back, and it's supposed to be very limited in terms of what it can do. Well, that's very exciting work on the Sphinx sprint. Thanks for breaking that down for us.
Yeah.
Was there anything else on the quantum updates we should hit?
No, I don't
before
think so.
we do some
I don't
live
think so.
call-ins? I think some people are queued up, actually.
Yeah, we can do some live call-ins.
Let's see what's up, see if anybody has any questions. Now, bear with me,
Do we
everyone.
want to touch on the consensus cleanup briefly first?
I
Or
do.
We have time for that.
Yeah, we could do that. And while you hit that off, I'm going to see if I can fiddle with Riverside's interface and figure out about this. It's my actually first time doing the live call-in thing, so I barely know what I'm doing.
So I was able to join the IRC chat these past 2 weeks, and one of the things that came up is Bit54, which is the consensus cleanup software proposal that's being made. A PR has been opened into Bitcoin Inquisition, which is a fork of Bitcoin designed to be a testnet network. And currently, Bitcoin core devs are reviewing the PR. We can go over briefly what the PR does. Some of the changes are very technical in nature. One of them deals with something called the time warp attack to basically prevent miners from speeding up the production of blocks. Another change has to do with Coinbase transactions, and I don't fully understand that one, but apparently there's an issue related to Coinbase transactions and when they are time locked. So this would mandate Coinbase transactions are time locked to the block height. And the last one, which is probably the most contentious, is a proposal to make 64-byte transactions illegal. So you no longer will be able to create a Bitcoin transaction that is exactly 64 bytes when it's stripped of its witness data. And the reason is that 64-byte transactions mess up Merkle proofs. So if you're running an SPV node, it's potentially possible for somebody to be able to fake a transaction in an SPV proof using a 64-byte transaction on mainnet. And one proposal is to then create a new type of Merkle proof on a new location that doesn't have this problem. Another solution, which is the one they're going with, is to allow Merkle proofs to continue to be used by SPV nodes, but just make 64-byte transactions invalid, which is a very odd rule, but it probably wouldn't affect people too much because to make a 64-byte transaction, it would either be an op return transaction with like 2 bytes in it, with a single output with an op return with 2 bytes in it or something like that.
So a 63-byte transaction will be allowed?
63-byte would be allowed, 65-byte would be allowed, but 64-byte would not. Yeah.
That's so oddly specific.
It's not very elegant, but it works, and it's basically not an issue because people don't create many 64-byte transactions.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So it's one of those things that's like nobody does this in practice. Like there's not like a common type of useful transaction that anybody would actually do. But if somebody did, then it would be an attack vector. It could be you could use it as part of an attack vector.
Correct. It would be an extremely difficult attack vector, but it is an attack vector.
Yeah. And I think all of the stuff that the consensus cleanup is fixing is very, you might say, nation state level attacker kind of stuff. Like when you talk about like the time warp bug and just like the amount of hassle that a miner has to go through, it seems like a very well funded actor that would be pulling something like that off.
Yeah.
And worth fixing. I don't mean that to diminish the work on consensus cleanup. More just putting that out there for people as a like putting this into context that we're not talking about some like one lone hacker in a hoodie, making a transaction and breaking Bitcoin. We're talking about like very, very well funded, well organized, somebody wants to bring down Bitcoin kind of apocalypse scenario.
I agree.
Yeah.
All right. Do we have any callers?
So it turns out we have 3 people. We got us, and then there's like 2 people watching, I think. They're in the studio. There's a button that says request live call-in. So if you wanted to do a live call-in, if you wanted to ask a question on the air or just had a comment you wanted to make, you can request the live call-in, and I will try to get you in, but you have to press that button. You have to request it. I can't just drag you in here. So go ahead and press it if y'all want to do it. Otherwise, we'll go chat about some other things while we wait. What else was on our list?
We had one more. Great script restoration.
Oh, yeah.
You want to talk about this one?
Yeah, so I was actually just learning about the VAROps thing the other day on the Bitcoin OpTech podcast, which was the main thing that I wanted to dig into. Now, I actually haven't been. I'll admit I haven't been following the Great Script Restoration too closely, though I've heard it talked about at BitDevs meetups and stuff before. But this VAROps proposal that Julian is talking about on the mailing list, I thought was really interesting. So, like there's currently this limit in Bitcoin called SIGOPS, and SIGOPS is supposed to be like a limit on the number of signature operations that you can do in a given transaction. And I think, a lot of times when people think about like limitations on Bitcoin Core, like what we can and can't do with it, or Bitcoin nodes more generally, we think of things like the block size, and like, okay, we want to keep the block size small enough so that everybody can run a node. But there's also other aspects to running a full node. That's not just like, how much does it take to store the blockchain in the UTXO set? There's also the download time, and there's the validation time. So like every time you're checking a transaction with a Bitcoin node, you're basically trying to run run this little program to see if it outputs to true, to see if it succeeds. That's how you're validating every single transaction. And there's a computational cost to that. And, it's, for most of the Bitcoin transactions we do, it's just something simple like I'm signing a transaction that, it's like this transaction could be spent by the person with this public key, and I'm just making a single signature. So it's a pretty simple one to validate. But, on a technical level, it's possible to construct Bitcoin transactions with some pretty fancy arrangements of opcodes that will do more sophisticated programs. And those can sometimes have an increased validation time. And so the concern is over, in a similar kind of manner as the consensus cleanup, the concern is the amount of time it takes to validate certain transactions. I think previously we were just concerned about signature operations, but the VAROps idea is that like there's actually ways that you can string together opcodes in Bitcoin that have nothing to do with signatures, but if you string together the right collection of opcodes, you can make a transaction that's like super hard to validate. And so what this proposal is basically like, how do we it's basically around just like limiting the number of operations you can do in general, and like assigning a budget to opcodes for how much you can do. And what Julian is posting about here on the list here is he actually has some software that you can download and kind of run some benchmarking tests on your machine. And the reason he's got the benchmarking test is because, Bitcoin nodes have, it could be run on a lot of different hardware. It could be run on some big, enterprise cloud server like we do at Voltage. Could be just somebody running it on a Raspberry Pi. Could be somebody trying to run it on some other device. It could be any random device, right? So he's trying to benchmark it to see what signature validation is like on different devices, so that he can get a good idea of it. And I'll kind of tie a bow on what I'm saying here is that I was listening to a podcast with Elon Musk, and where he was talking about SpaceX, like blowing up rockets and stuff. He was talking about how they actually blow them up intentionally because they need to learn about the limits of them. We need to know how much pressure will cause this device to blow up. Because if you don't know the limits on something, you're just kind of flying blind. And I liken that to kind of what Julian is doing here. He wants you to run the benchmarking to test out these budgets so that we can stress test the limits of these far out budgets.
Very good description.
Thanks. I thought it was cool. I learned something new this week. We had a comment in the chat from Nintendo 9231889. When will sailors stop preventing privacy development? That's a good question.
Oh, it's actually very interesting. MicroStrategy or strategy is very against actual usage of Bitcoin at the P2P layer, it seems like. They have made comments. I remember when was it Steak and Shake announced that they were accepting Lightning?
Yeah.
And they made comments explicitly that this is a terrible usage of Bitcoin and that Bitcoin should not be used this way. They're trying to straddle a world where Bitcoin exists and it's very valuable, but it's not money, and the dollar continues to be used for everyday currency. And I think that the reason that they're against privacy is of a similar nature. They're not focused on Bitcoin's usage as money. They're not focused on Bitcoin's usage as a tool for people to be able to transport their wealth across borders as a tool for freedom. Their concern is that if Bitcoin had this technology, then it would actually hurt Bitcoin because it would invoke the ire of governments who would then crack down on Bitcoin, prevent its trading, etc., because Bitcoin now is more capable as being used by the bad guys. And you can't really build something that's neutral infrastructure that's able to differentiate between who's using it. And so I think that's kind of that's my intuition. They don't want Bitcoin to be banned, and so they personally don't think there's any benefit to Bitcoin having better privacy. To Bitcoin's valuation, I think they're wrong on that front.
Yeah.
But they think that there's no value to Bitcoin's growth is not privacy is not needed for Bitcoin to thrive, and so privacy could only hurt Bitcoin's ability to get adopted. I think that's their perspective.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, I think the most charitable interpretation of Saylor's viewpoint, or if we're going to steel man it, it would be like inflation is bad, it harms everybody, and Bitcoin is our best way of preventing the negative effects of inflation. And as such, we need to protect it. And contentious consensus changes and privacy and all these other things, risk blowing up this great inflation-resistant thing we have. So let's just have this cool inflation-resistant thing called Bitcoin, and just have Bitcoin banks all around the world, and people interact through Bitcoin banks. And at least the money's harder, and at least the banks actually have the Bitcoin. And I think that's kind of, if I were to steel man his position. But I don't agree with it. That's not why I got into Bitcoin.
Even that I don't think is necessarily the case, because that would imply that Bitcoin would be used as the medium of exchange, which he has explicitly said is not what he thinks should be the case. Yeah. So I'm not really sure Yeah, not really sure what the end state he has in mind exactly, other than what Bitcoin already is.
Yeah. We had a comment here from Justin Nakamoto. Will CTV be the next opcode likely to be added? And actually, Nintendo just bumped the same comment up. Yeah, great question. Not one that we can answer ourselves, but that is interesting because
Yeah.
there was a thing we added to our topics list today. There is a post on the mailing list today, CTV activation meeting on IRC, and this is posted by Dev FD0. That's a developer joke. That's the where you find the floppy disk on your Linux system. He's a floppy disk guy. But he says, "Hi everyone, we will organize a meeting next week to discuss the activation parameters for BIP 119. You can review the related pull requests, different activation methods, past meeting logs, etc., and participate in the discussion." And he puts a IRC channel on libera.chat that you can go on if you're interested. So
Next Thursday. So yeah, if you want CTV, join the IRC chat next Thursday and run their activation client.
Yeah. Yeah, it'd be interesting to see if how that pans out. I mean, I does, in my opinion, from what I've observed, I do think CTV is the one that we have like the most mind share and consensus around at this point. I wouldn't say like we have consensus among everybody, but I think it has the most out of all the kind of software proposals. I feel like it has, is the closest to reaching critical mass.
I don't know if I agree.
Yeah.
I think that CTV may not be the opcode that we end up adopting. I think there's a lot of interest in something called template hash.
Oh, sure.
Which is a CTV equivalent proposal that's being pushed by the core devs, who not necessarily being pushed, but being offered as an alternative. And so I think that it's possible that CTV gets adopted, but I think it's probably more likely that template hash would get adopted rather than CTV if one of them gets adopted.
Yeah, and I agree with your assessment there. I would say that's to put a finer point on what I just said. I think, I guess a better way to put it is I think the functionality that CTV proposes is, likely what, would get merged next. That's just a thought, but it could be in the form of template hash. And like to break it down for everybody, like the primary difference between those is that CTV uses legacy script. Template hash is a more TypeScript native way of doing things.
Right.
So,
and then template hash would be probably adopted alongside something like checksig from SAC, which you need in order to get a lot of the benefits from template hash for things like Lightning, is my understanding. I would also say that, so I think that it's probably likely that you'll get something like template hash, if not CTV, within the next couple of years. I think that's plausible. I also think it's worth saying that there's, in terms of other opcodes, covenant-related opcodes, it sounds like simplicity might be where a lot of the developer mindshare is these days.
what?
I know. It does sound like that. This is my very vague read of the room. I wouldn't be surprised, it's my hypothesis, that one of the reasons why we haven't seen more movement on the covenant front is because the core devs think that if we're going to adopt something with more expressive functionality, the way to do it is simplicity, and it's better to wait for simplicity to be ready rather than adopting something like transaction hash in the intermediate term. That's my hypothesis. I don't know. I may be wrong.
Well, I mean, and I that hypothesis kind of captures the always the back and forth debate with these kinds of protocol updates, which is like, do we want to implement the thing that's good enough, or do we want to implement the thing that we feel is really robust and like the best engineering solution?
I do get the sense that that is the perspective that the lead developers take. They care the most about, hey, we're not in a rush. We don't want to include anything into the code base. It's going to be there forever. That we don't think is the correct long-term solution. And so it's better to wait a few years to develop that best solution than to rush something that is not as elegant. frankly, I think that's one of the reasons why some of the core devs has some pushback against CTV, is at the code level. It's not nearly as elegant, for example, as something like template hash, because it doesn't necessarily reuse as much of the code as template hash reuses. At least that's the perspective I've gotten. And so you need to take your perspective, and so, like, for the core developers, like they care a lot about elegance, simplicity. That's a double entendre, I suppose. But they care a lot about elegance and simplicity and things that are going to be the correct solution hundreds of years from now. It's kind of honestly one of the motivations for cluster mempool in some respects, because cluster mempool represents close to the theoretical solution to the problem of constructing the mempool and deciding what goes in and what goes out.
Yeah.
And so that's the perspective I think a lot of the core devs take. And I think that's probably the perspective that will guide determinations about what types of softworks are going to get their weight behind.
That's interesting. And yeah, simplicity is really cool. It's running on Liquid right now on the sidechain. And not to imply that it is a Liquid specific piece of tooling. It's kind of like this additional programming language that you could use instead of the traditional opcodes. It's on Liquid right now, because we can't just deploy that stuff to Bitcoin Core, obviously. So you can actually test it out on Liquid. But that's kind of the testing ground for simplicity. And
You want to say briefly what simplicity is?
I mean, I kind of just described my raw understanding of it.
Okay.
Why don't you go into...
No, I think it's pretty good. I mean, I think simplicity you can think of as a hyper generic scripting language where anything that you could do with an opcode, you could do in simplicity. And then once you've adopted simplicity, you can then add improvements to make it more efficient, that which you are doing. So rather than adding a new opcode every time you want to do something, you could just start doing it with simplicity and then make the argument like, hey, can't we make this more efficient by adding a new change to Bitcoin that then skips a few steps? And so you're able to do any of the proposals we've talked about related to L2s or shielded CSV, you'll be able to do with simplicity. And then if a certain use case becomes very popular, you could then fork in something called a jet, which allows you to skip some steps and save data and save bytes and do it much more efficiently. So that's my understanding of simplicity. And I think it's one of the reasons why people find it appealing. It also has some interesting properties because it's safe from a certain perspective from DOS attacks, from bad actors trying to abuse Bitcoin by creating expensive programs to run, because you can verify how costly the program is before you even run it.
Yeah, that was the idea. Is I thought that it was like I had heard somebody telling me that once, that it was like deterministic. You don't have to worry about it being recursive.
Correct. There's no recursion in it, and you're able to know the cost of running the program before you run it, or at least the maximum cost, which is a really cool feature.
Yeah. Very cool. Well, that's cool. I wasn't expecting to get into simplicity, but I'm glad we did. So
Yeah.
Thanks for the questions in the chat, everybody. Well, I think we're running up on time here. I do want to, before we wrap up, go over some of our zaps. I think we got, let me pull up the ATL BitLab. You can go to fountain.fm if you want to support the show. Search for ATL BitLab. That's ATL space BITLAB. And you'll find BitDev's Radio Hour and all the other stuff going on the BitLab podcast feed there. We got a zap from XFrog after the last show. Love these. Keep it up. Hey, thanks for the support, XFrog. And glad you're enjoying the show. XFrog is like the most renowned AV guy in all of Bitcoin. It's because we didn't have XFrog here that we had the stream cut out of us in the middle of episode 2 of this show. And because we didn't have XFrog, why the first recording of the presentation you did for us back in January got screwed up. XFrog fixes all your AV problems. Okay, cool. Well, anything else you want to mention before we wrap things up, Josh?
No. Thank you for having me.
Of course, thanks for joining.
Enjoyed it. I hope that the audience enjoyed it too.
Yeah, we'll include a link to Josh's talk from Bitcoin Plus Plus in the show notes, as well as links to some of the other stuff. Support us on Fountain.fm if you like what we're doing. Share it with your friends and colleagues, and we might see you next Friday. We'll see how things go, but otherwise, we'll see you in the future. Catch you later. Okay, we are.